Well, let's get to our conversation this afternoon. Good news, President Bola Tinubu has received 4 critical tax reform bills that could significantly transform Nigeria's fiscal landscape. The National Assembly delivered the bill to the president on Tuesday, marking a step in the government's ambitious overhaul of the country's tax system. Now, the bills include the Nigerian Tax Bill, Nigerian Tax Administration Bill, and the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Bill and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill. The Finance Minister and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, revealed this development at a celebration organized by Mr. Taiwo Edele to celebrate his birthday. That's the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms in Abuja. That event happened on Wednesday. The minister emphasized that once signed into law, these reforms are poised to enhance the efficiency and fairness of Nigeria's tax system and nearly double the country's low tax to GDP ratio, which is one of the lowest globally. My guest is Siri Agbeyi. She is a partner leading PwC's Africa's family business. It's good to see you, Siri. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Good to see you, Tolu. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I think it is good to start with the positive expected with this bills. You see, I'm interested in that aspect. I just saw now that it would help increase our tax to GDP ratio, which is something that I have not been so happy about. I think we're doing about 10% or 11% at this time. It used to be 8 for a long time. But what do you make of it? And at this point where it is, what are your expectations from the president after being gone through, of course, by the Attorney General of the Federation?
Yeah, thanks, Tolu. I think we're at a very critical and significant point in the history of the country because, as you know, the tax laws had been very outdated for a long time and not necessarily overhauled. We've had piecemeal reviews to some of the tax laws. But this is the first time where we're having a major review and overhaul. And like you said, we have 4 key bills that have been put before the legislative houses to pass. And they've all been passed. So we have primarily the Nigeria tax bill that's looking to harmonize all the tax policies and hopefully reduce multiple taxation issues. So it's kind of worrisome when we hear that the tax to GDP ratio is still as low as 11%, even though we have quite a number of taxpayers complaining about the multiple taxation. And one of the key things as well that this overhaul is looking to do is look at the inefficiencies in the administrative process of collecting the revenues. So while we may have multiple taxation, sometimes those revenues do not get into government's pockets. So there is a Nigeria Tax Administration Bill as well that's looking to standardize tax processes across all levels of government to reduce these inefficiencies and improve compliance. Number 3, there is a Nigeria Revenue Service Bill that would look to replace the FRS as we know them with a more autonomous and regionally inclusive Nigeria Revenue Service. And last but not least, would have then a Joint Revenue Board Bill, which also has been passed by the legislative houses, that's looking to also enhance integrity in the system by providing, for example, for an ombudsman that would basically advocate for the interest of taxpayers as well, so that it offers some balance as opposed to just always having to collect revenues and enhance revenue collection for the government. The expectation is that the president will then assent to these bills swiftly to enable implementation. And over time, I do expect that leadership will then ensure that they are operationalized. So a big part of those bills would be how they become how they're implemented, how systems are upgraded to take cognizance of the fact that we would no longer do business as we used to do in the past. A big major change, for instance, is around the VAT fiscalization, which would mean that on the spot, buyers, sellers would have to have fiscalization machines that allow for charging of VAT as transactions happen. And then the revenues also go directly to the government coffers. That means a number of systems have to be upgraded to allow for that, but it also means that quite a number of obstacles with respect to data privacy would also have to be overcome. So there's a lot that has to happen in terms of implementation, making the public and businesses aware of these changes, and also building trust in the reforms for it to work as expected.
Indeed, I was heading there, issues around implementation. And even according to the minister, he says anything about implementation would come up from next year. That's what he's saying. So considering that fact, we've talked about how easy it will be taking out some of those taxes that used to just be in the block and all. But can we specifically say how this will impact on the man on the street? The man on the street wants to understand that those that are earning below a particular level will not pay taxes, and those that are earning so much or has at a level will pay more than they used to pay. Can we get to also some clarity around that space?
Sorry, Tolu, I lost you a bit when you asked the question. If you could just repeat quickly.
All right. Well, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, I'm talking about the clear impact of this on the vulnerable ones, on those that are earning, say, less than 1 million, say, in a year. What impact would this have, around their finances?
Yeah, so Tolu, that's very critical as well, because as you know, we've had major reforms that included or involved the huge spike in inflation rates, and that definitely has a direct impact on the vulnerable in society. The ability to be able to even purchase goods and items has fast eroded most of the population in Nigeria. What the tax reform is also proposing are certain interventions that could help to protect this population. And we've seen that in terms of proposals around the income tax rates on individuals, there's a lot more tilt towards taxing high income earners, with the overall head rate being increased to about 25%. What's also impressive is the fact that for the first time, we're also having a clearer definition of individuals that are resident in Nigeria, so that we then have an expansive net for taxing individuals as well. Secondly, there's going to be simplified tax regimes and incentives for small businesses. Currently, we do have a threshold or a cap for about 25 million naira in turnover that's exempt from taxes, but the current tax bills propose doubling that rate as well, so that a lot more businesses that would have been crushed by the macroeconomic changes that we've all faced are protected. In recent times, we've heard about the conditional cash transfers as well that have come with this government, which present some form of social safety net for the vulnerables too. I think a combination of that and hopefully the tax reforms, when put into place, would be very useful in protecting them. But we must not also forget that our unemployment rates are very high, over 30%. And so it's very critical that jobs are created to provide additional income for those who do not have them. What the bill is also looking to do is provide incentives to certain targeted sectors. And there's something that's called the Economic Development Incentive, which has identified priority sectors where we believe Nigeria needs to grow rapidly. And some of those hover around the digital economy space, because it's important that now we start to drive a lot more job creation around digital services, knowing that AI is gradually, in fact, not gradually, very fastly disrupting every industry as we know it. There's also investments or incentives around the power sector, the transportation sector, digital infrastructure, which I've mentioned before, manufacturing as well. These sectors or industries are very critical to providing succor to the vulnerable. So I'm hoping that once these bills are passed or become law, very quickly regulations will come through that will give guidance on how these incentives can be applied for and just how very quickly we can regulate or monitor how these are also improving employment in the country.
It's been a while we had this chart, so I'm going to ask you the fallout of course, the economic reform. There's a time where there's been a lot of assessments around President Tinubu's mid-year and, of course, the fallout of the bold reforms, and notably that subsidy removal and, of course, liberalization of the exchange rate. You'll be monitoring that space, and I just want to ask you what you think with regards, particularly with the fallout of this policies. Yes, we know that the central bank is doing pretty well with regards to net reserves and, of course, external reserves looking pretty good. Analysts will also agree that there's been a bit of stability with the foreign exchange market. But just I'd like you to, what do you make an overview of what's been happening and the fallout we've seen thereafter?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting one. I think we've seen early signs of stabilization, but it's still fragile. And like you've mentioned, the FX reserves are gradually recovering. Naira has also shown signs of stabilization after months of volatility, and that was really crazy. Inflation is still high, but the pace of increase is slowing down. And the good thing is that Fitch and Moody's have revised Nigeria's outlook from negative to stable, and they've cited reform momentum and improved fiscal discipline as the reason for the increased rating. So, however, I think over and above all of this, stability would definitely be contingent on sustained policy consistency and effective implementation of the reforms that we had cited. It's also important that public expectations are very closely managed, because what you may tend to find is social media outroar. So a lot of the youths would definitely be out there and also discredit what gains there are if not properly communicated. Again, these are short-term wins, and it's important that we now make this more stabilized. And ever so often, there is communication to the larger populace on when these gains would fully materialize. I think on the larger outlook, we know already that some of the things that we definitely need to see is a diversified economy in terms of what we export, and how we generate our forex. What we're also seeing on the continent in terms of geopolitical tensions affects Nigeria. It affects us just as it's affecting other economies globally. And it's important to keep track of those. We're seeing very easily that globalization is going on a retreat. So before now, we used to have that globalization was the way to go, but now there's a lot more populism, and a lot more nations are beginning to become more guarded about their policies, whether it's from immigration or whether it's from who they trade with. Africa is at that point where we do need to enhance what we have in terms of the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, which for a very long time, I think hasn't really been fully implemented. So it's gone at a very slow rate. And if you look at the statistics, Africa is operating or trading at a very low rate relative to Europe and even Asia. So we're only trading amongst ourselves at about 15%, whereas Europe is over 60%. There are opportunities definitely for Nigerian businesses to capitalize on that and therefore begin to export into other regions beyond Nigeria. Two is also the fact that supply chains are impacted by some of these global volatilities. how businesses can identify opportunities for change, whether it's in regionalizing their supply chains or expanding them into other regions, is critical. So I think a combination of some of those short-term wins that we have here, but innovative ideas as well from businesses will go a long way to stabilizing the economy.
I would like to ask you before I take you my last question, what specific kind of interventions would you be looking at? I'm really concerned about interventions and the kind of interventions we are instituting. Can you hear me?
No, I think I've lost you for a bit.
But can you hear me now?
Yes.
What sort of interventions would you expect to at least help impact on the macro aspect of these reforms? Wow.
Sorry, I can't hear you anymore, Tolu.
Hello, can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Siri?
Okay, yes.
Okay, I was talking about interventions. That what sort of interventions would you advise for?
Did you ask what I would advise?
For interventions, yes, interventions.
Okay. I'm not sure I really heard you, but I'm thinking that you said something about what I would advise or the outlook.
Go ahead. Yes. Go ahead. Yes. Yes, go ahead.
All right. Okay. I think Nigeria has a demographic dividend and resource potential, and unlocking it does require institutional reforms, some of which rally around building efficiencies within our government agencies that support and make the doing business easier for businesses that grow in country. Number 2 is around human capital investment, and number 3 around infrastructure development. And I highlight these two as critical because we're now at a time where there's a lot of issues that businesses must deal with, ranging from geopolitical tensions, like I'd mentioned before, to AI advancements, and even climate change that's becoming ever so real. I think one of the things that businesses today must start to think about is how they must transcend doing things the traditional way, but look at the opportunities that technology brings. And this is where human capital investment needs to be tended towards. For the most part, we have a very large youth base, and that's our demographic dividend. But it's really how we can harness the fact that we have this youth, but also have technology opportunities coming on board, and how we can plug that space with the infrastructure and agencies in the country to ensure that we have a thriving environment for growth and productivity. So I would say that on the back of the tax reform that has informed several incentives on the industries that we want to grow, but also the monetary policies that have come through as well that seem to have stabilized inflation. We need to capitalize on that strongly with infrastructure development and attraction of FDI to enhance growth. So maybe I'll stop there. I don't know if I got your question right, but I just thought to throw that in.
You did, but can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, then, okay, if you can, I was asking about interventions, specific interventions for the vulnerable moving forward.
Hello?
All right, I think that's it. Can you hear me, Siri?
No.
Okay, I must thank you so much. Let's leave it at that. Siri Agbeyi is partner leading PwC's Africa's family business. Thank you so much for making sense of this conversation before we got the network challenge. Thank you so much, and do enjoy your weekend if you can hear me.